The shot was impossible. 3,200 meters through swirling mountain winds across 3 jagged ridges. The bullet traveled for
take this
nearly
route to
6
the target.
seconds, arcing through the thin Montana
That's
air
too risky.
before
There's an enemy
striking its
checkpoint.
target with
We'll
surgical
bypass it through the
precision.
woods.
The terrorist fell
It's
instantly.
all right.
A
This will
single
hold.
50 caliber round had found its mark across a distance no human eye could see clearly without advanced optics. The stunned silence that followed was broken only when Master Sergeant Scott Collins whispered into his radio, "Jesus Christ, who took that shot?" No one expected the answer. No one believed a quiet medical advisor who'd endured months of mockery could perform what some considered a mathematical impossibility. No one thought the woman they dismissively called Bookworm would become the most legendary sniper since Carlos Hathcock. But the story of Olivia Liv Hayes and her impossible shot began 1 year earlier when a Black Hawk helicopter touched down at Training Camp Delta in Montana's unforgiving Rocky Mountains, a dusty, fortified outpost that would change everything. Camp Delta sat like an angular scar against the rugged Montana landscape, surrounded by mountains that stretched endlessly toward Canada. The forward operating base housed 200 personnel, mostly battle-hardened Rangers with multiple combat deployments, men who had seen action in Fallujah, Kandahar, and countless unnamed villages where survival depended on trust, skill, and knowing exactly who you could count on when bullets started flying. In the wake of heightened domestic terrorism threats, Camp Delta had become a critical staging ground for counterinsurgency training. The base had suffered 8 casualties in the past month alone from precision shots taken at Rangers on patrol. Intelligence suggested a professional marksman was operating in the region. Colonel James Iron Reynolds watched the supply helicopter descend through his office window. At 58, the Desert Storm veteran's weathered face bore the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades in America's most classified battlefields. Through the swirling particles, he could make out the silhouettes of the arriving personnel: 4 supply officers, 2 communications specialists, and 1 medical advisor. Among them, a woman walking with quiet confidence, carrying a standard-issue duffel bag and medical kit. There was something in her posture, a kind of awareness that seemed unusual, the way her eyes automatically scanned her surroundings, how she registered potential cover positions, the measured pace of someone constantly calculating distances. 5 minutes later, the new medical advisor stood before Reynolds' desk, her paperwork laid out with methodical precision. "Lieutenant Olivia Hayes reporting for duty, sir. Medical support assignment for 3rd Ranger Battalion." Reynolds studied the younger woman carefully, 26 years old. Olive skin weathered by mountain sun, dark hair pulled back in regulation style. But it was her eyes that made Reynolds pause, deep brown eyes that carried the kind of quiet alertness he had seen only in experienced combat veterans. These were not the eyes of someone who had spent their career in medical tents. "Your record shows advanced trauma care, battlefield triage, and emergency surgery certification," Reynolds noted. "That's impressive for your experience level." "Yes, sir." Hayes's voice was steady, offering nothing additional. "You should know the Rangers here have been operating in continuous contact zones for 8 months. They've learned to be particular about who they trust with their medical care." Reynolds leaned forward slightly. "Some of them might test you." Olivia's response was simple. "I understand, sir. I'm here to keep people alive." What Colonel Reynolds couldn't have known was that Olivia Hayes had grown up in the mountains of Montana, where her father, Thomas "Ghost" Hayes, had been one of the most decorated snipers in Navy SEAL history before his death 3 years earlier. What Reynolds couldn't see was the old M1000 911 pistol carefully packed in Olivia's footlocker, its grip worn smooth by years of use with TH etched into the barrel, the only physical memento Olivia had kept of her father. "Gentlemen, meet our latest addition to the medical team," Lieutenant Wilson announced to the assembled Rangers during the morning briefing. At 62, Jack Wilson was old for an active duty training officer, but his experience in Cold War operations, Panama, and Desert Storm made him invaluable to Camp Delta. The former SEAL Team 6 operator had survived 3 decades in America's shadow wars. His weathered face, lined by decades of combat stress, twisted into what passed for a welcoming smile as he gestured toward Olivia, who stood quietly near the back of the briefing room. "Doc Hayes here is going to keep you breathing when things get interesting out there." The room contained 30 Rangers, most with multiple combat deployments. Their expressions ranged from casual indifference to barely disguised skepticism as they assessed the new medical advisor. Private Thompson, a cocky 22-year-old from Texas with 2 deployments under his belt, raised his hand with a smirk. "Sir, does she know the difference between a tourniquet and a tactical reload?" The room erupted in laughter, and Olivia felt 30 pairs of eyes studying her reaction. She simply nodded respectfully toward Thompson and remained silent, her expression unchanged. "Don't worry, Thompson," Wilson continued, clearly enjoying the moment. "I'm sure Doc Hayes has read all about combat medicine in her textbooks." More laughter followed, and Olivia noticed how quickly the Rangers had categorized her: book smart but battlefield naive. Another rear echelon medic who would probably freeze during her first real contact. They began calling her bookworm behind her back. The nickname spread through the base like wildfire. What they failed to notice was how her hands moved during weapons maintenance periods. When all personnel were required to clean and inspect their assigned firearms, Olivia worked on her standard-issue M4 carbine with methodical attention. She stripped, cleaned, and reassembled the weapon with movements that were smooth and automatic. To the casual observer, she looked like any other soldier performing routine maintenance. Only someone with advanced marksmanship training might have noticed how she automatically checked the barrel alignment, tested the trigger mechanism with the delicate touch of someone who understood precision shooting, or adjusted the scope with micro movements that spoke of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Wilson noticed, and it troubled him deeply. The Montana mountains stretched like ancient sentinels against the clear blue sky. 17-year-old Olivia lay prone on the rocky ridge, her breathing slow and measured, her eye pressed against the scope of a Remington M40A1 sniper rifle. Next to her, Thomas "Ghost" Hayes watched with quiet pride as his daughter made final adjustments to her aim. "Remember, Liv," he said, using the nickname only he ever called her. "At this distance, you're not just shooting a rifle, you're solving a complex physics equation." The target stood 1,700 meters away, a small steel plate barely visible to the naked eye. The morning breeze swept through the valley between them, creating variable wind conditions that would challenge even experienced military snipers. "Feel the wind," Thomas continued, "not just here, but all along the bullet's path. Visualize the journey." The M40A1 was a military precision instrument, 7.62 millimeters caliber, match-grade barrel, Macmillan fiberglass stock, unertl 10-power scope. It was the same model Thomas had used during Operation Desert Storm, where he'd established himself as one of the deadliest snipers in Navy SEAL history. "Remember, this isn't about taking life," Thomas said softly. "This is about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Every shot we take carries responsibility." Olivia's finger rested gently against the trigger, applying pressure with microscopic precision. Her breathing slowed further, her heartbeat steadied, and in the space between beats, she squeezed. The rifle cracked, sending its round through the mountain air. Less than 2 seconds later, the distant steel plate rang with a satisfying ping. Thomas checked the distance with laser range-finding equipment. 1,712 meters. Perfect center hit. He placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "That's a shot most qualified military snipers couldn't make." Olivia looked up at her father, who had been teaching her marksmanship since she could first hold a rifle. "Why are you teaching me to shoot like this if you don't want me to join the military?" Thomas was silent for a moment, his weathered face contemplative. "These skills come with responsibility, Liv. I've taught you how to take life accurately, but more importantly, I've taught you when not to." He looked toward the distant mountains. "The most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody sees coming. Remember that." What Olivia couldn't have known then was how those words would echo across the years, and how the skills her father had insisted she master would one day save dozens of lives and force her to confront exactly who she truly was. 3 weeks into Olivia's assignment at Camp Delta, a ranger patrol returned with casualties. They had been ambushed near the northern perimeter, 3 men wounded by precision fire from extreme distances. "Medic, we need a medic over here now," Sergeant Collins shouted as the squad stumbled through the main gate, half carrying Master Sergeant Morrison between them. "We've got a man down, possible arterial damage." The base's primary physician, Dr. Williams, was currently at Fort Harrison, conducting emergency surgery on casualties from another unit, leaving Olivia as the senior medical personnel on site. She appeared within seconds, moving with a calm urgency that immediately took control of the situation. "Get him to the aid station," she directed, her voice cutting through the chaos with quiet authority. "Thompson, I need you to start an IV line. Rodriguez, prep the surgical table and get me a full trauma kit." The arterial wound on Morrison's left thigh had been properly dressed in the field, but field conditions had allowed serious blood loss. The area around the wound was swollen and discolored, with clear signs the bullet had nicked the femoral artery. Morrison was semi-conscious, his breathing shallow and rapid, classic signs of hypovolemic shock that could kill him within hours, if not properly treated. "Jesus, bookworm," muttered Thompson as he struggled to find a vein for the IV line. "His pressure is dropping fast. Shouldn't we call for a medevac helicopter?" There was genuine fear in his voice. Morrison was a popular squad leader, and everyone knew that arterial damage could kill even the strongest soldier if it wasn't treated aggressively and immediately. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she was examining Morrison's wound with the kind of focused concentration that made everything else in the room disappear. Her hands probed the damaged tissue with movements so precise and confident that even the experienced rangers found themselves watching in fascination. This wasn't the hesitant examination of someone following textbook procedures. This was the practiced assessment of someone who had dealt with severe battlefield trauma under pressure. "The nearest helicopter is 40 minutes out," she said finally, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "He doesn't have 40 minutes. We're going to have to repair this here and get him stabilized before we can risk transport." She paused, looking directly at Sergeant Collins. "I need you to clear everyone except Thompson and Rodriguez. This is going to be messy, and I need space to work." What happened next would be talked about in the Camp Delta mess hall for months afterward. Working with instruments designed for basic field medicine rather than complex surgery, Olivia began the delicate process of repairing Morrison's damaged artery. Her hands moved with surgical precision, making incisions that were exactly the right depth and length to provide access without causing additional tissue damage. She worked with a confidence and skill level that seemed impossible for someone with her supposed experience. "How did you know to make the incision there?" asked Rodriguez, watching in amazement as Olivia's technique immediately accessed the damaged artery. "I've seen field surgeries before, but that was—" He trailed off, unable to find words for what he was witnessing. "Anatomy textbooks," Olivia replied without looking up from her work. But her hands were moving with the kind of muscle memory that comes from practical experience, not academic study. She was simultaneously monitoring Morrison's vital signs, managing the repair procedure, and preparing the correct medication dosages, a level of multitasking that would challenge even experienced emergency room physicians. 20 minutes later, Morrison's vitals had stabilized. The arterial repair was complete, and Olivia had the wound properly cleaned and dressed with techniques that went far beyond standard field medicine. When Dr. Williams arrived via helicopter an hour later, he found Morrison conscious, stable, and well on his way to recovery. "Outstanding work, Hayes, Doctor," Williams said after examining her treatment notes and observing Morrison's condition. "That arterial repair probably saved his life and his leg. Where did you learn to handle trauma cases like that?" His tone carried genuine professional curiosity. The level of skill Olivia had demonstrated was typically found only among trauma surgeons with years of emergency room experience. "Field medicine training was very thorough, sir," Olivia answered, but several rangers noticed that she avoided making direct eye contact during the explanation. "I've always been good at following procedures under pressure." It was a modest deflection that satisfied Dr. Williams, but left some of the more observant soldiers with questions they couldn't quite articulate. Corporal Martinez pulled Thompson aside after the medical team had finished their post-treatment evaluation. "Did you see how steady her hands were during that whole procedure?" he asked quietly. "I mean, Morrison was dying. We all knew it. But Bookworm never even looked nervous. She just took care of business like she'd done it 100 times before." Thompson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And that arterial technique. I've seen combat medics work before, but nothing like that. She cut through damaged tissue like she could see exactly where to go, like she had some kind of map in her head." He paused, looking toward the aid station where Olivia was cleaning her instruments with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Makes you wonder what else she learned in that thorough training program. The incident marked a subtle shift in how some of the Rangers viewed their quiet medic. The nickname Bookworm persisted, but it began to carry a note of respect rather than dismissal. Morrison himself became one of Olivia's most vocal supporters, telling anyone who would listen that Bookworm saved my life when the real doctors weren't around. His advocacy helped ease some of the skepticism that had surrounded Olivia since her arrival, though Lieutenant Wilson remained noticeably unmoved by the display of medical competence. "Impressive technique, Hayes," Wilson commented during the next morning's briefing. "But technical skill in controlled environments is different from performance under fire. Remember that." His words carried a warning that everyone in the room understood. At Camp Delta, respect was earned through action under enemy fire, not procedures performed in the relative safety of the aid station. No matter how impressive Olivia's medical skills might be, in Wilson's eyes, she remained untested where it truly mattered. That evening, alone in her quarters, Olivia sat on the edge of her cot, the worn photograph of her father in her hands. She traced her finger along the edge of the image, memories flooding back with painful clarity. It had been raining the day they told her about her father's death. A training accident at Quantico, they said. A mechanical failure with equipment that should have been routinely maintained. A tragic error that took the life of one of the most skilled snipers the Navy SEALs had ever produced. But Olivia knew something wasn't right. She had been there that day, observing her father's demonstration from the viewing area. She had seen his expression change in the moment before the equipment failed. Not surprise, but recognition. Something in his eyes had shifted from confusion to understanding, as if he had suddenly realized what was happening. The official investigation concluded that the failure was accidental, metal fatigue in a support cable, impossible to detect without specialized equipment. But Thomas Hayes had inspected his own equipment religiously. He would never have used gear he hadn't personally verified as safe. In the weeks that followed, Olivia had tried to raise questions, to push for a more thorough investigation. But she was just the daughter of the deceased, her concerns dismissed as the natural response of someone grieving a sudden loss. Now, 3 years later, she found herself back in uniform, but in a role her father might not have recognized, a healer rather than a shooter. She had promised herself after his death that she would use the skills he taught her to save lives, not take them, that she would honor his memory by becoming the opposite of what he had trained her to be. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly tucked the photograph away and opened the door to find Lieutenant Wilson standing there, his expression unreadable. "Hayes," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Wilson stepped into her quarters and closed the door behind him. His eyes fell on her open footlocker, where the edge of her father's journal was visible. Without asking permission, he picked it up, turning to a dog-eared page filled with ballistic calculations. "I knew it," he said, his voice a mixture of confirmation and concern. "I recognized your hands on that M4 yesterday, the way you checked headspace and timing. That's not standard training, that's Ghost Hayes' technique." Olivia felt her body tense, ready for confrontation, but Wilson's next words caught her off guard. "Your father saved my life in Iraq, 1991. Desert Storm. A Republican Guard unit had my team pinned down near the Kuwait border. Ghost made a shot at 1,800 meters in a sandstorm that no one else would have even attempted." He handed the journal back to Olivia with careful respect. I know why you're here, Hayes. You're hunting the man who killed your father. The question is, do you know what you're getting yourself into? The morning briefing brought news that sent ripples of tension through Camp Delta. Colonel Reynolds stood at the front of the room, his face grim. Intelligence confirms what we've suspected, he announced to the assembled personnel. We're dealing with a highly skilled marksman operating in our area. The shooter has been identified as Viktor Petrov, former Soviet Spetsnaz, with ties to various international terror groups. A satellite image appeared on the screen behind him, a grainy photo of a man with cold, pale eyes and a distinctive scar across his left cheekbone. Petrov is known for extreme distance shots using a modified SVD Dragunov rifle. He's credited with at least 14 confirmed kills of U.S. personnel across 3 different theaters of operation. Always the same signature, single shot, extreme distance, perfect placement. Reynolds paused, letting the information sink in. The Department of Defense is taking this situation seriously. Special Operations Command will be sending an evaluation team to assess our defensive measures and provide additional training in counter-sniper tactics. They arrive tomorrow. I expect everyone to provide full cooperation. As the briefing concluded, Wilson pulled Olivia aside, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Petrov isn't just any sniper, he said, his voice low. During the Cold War's final years, he was part of a joint Soviet-American black operation called Sidewinder, a deniable assassination program that continued even after the Soviet Union collapsed. Your father discovered it was still operational in 2020, targeting political figures in ways that served certain interests on both sides. Olivia's breath caught. My father was going to expose it. Wilson nodded grimly. I was at Quantico that day. That equipment failure wasn't an accident. I saw the cable. The cut pattern was distinctive, taught only to Spetsnaz operatives. I tried to tell the investigators, but no one would listen. 2 weeks later, I was forced into early retirement with a clear message to keep quiet. Why are you telling me this now? Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Because the SOCOM evaluation team arriving tomorrow includes Colonel Nathan Brooks. He served with your father in the final days of Vietnam and through the Cold War. If anyone can help you prove what happened to Ghost, it's Brooks. Wilson's eyes hardened. But if you're recognized as Thomas Hayes' daughter, you'll become a target. Petrov isn't working alone. The American side of Sidewinder is still operational, run by a Deputy Secretary of Defense named Harold Mitchell. That's why you've been so hard on me, Olivia realized. You were trying to keep me invisible. Wilson's weathered face showed the barest hint of a smile. Ghost always said you were quick. Yes, I was trying to keep you safe. But seeing you save Morrison yesterday made me realize something your father would have known. You're not just his legacy, you're your own person, and maybe it's time the world knew that. The SOCOM evaluation team arrived at Camp Delta on a crystal clear morning, their Black Hawk helicopters cutting through mountain air so pure you could see individual peaks 30 kilometers away. Colonel Nathan Brooks stepped onto the landing zone with the measured confidence of someone who had spent decades in America's most classified battle spaces. At 64, Brooks carried himself with the ramrod posture of old-school special operations. His silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating gaze gave him the appearance of a man who had seen everything warfare had to offer and emerged with his humanity intact. The evaluation was officially designated as a readiness assessment, but everyone understood the underlying message. This was about finding a counter to Petrov and potentially exposing the Sidewinder operation that had remained hidden for decades. Brooks spent the morning reviewing Camp Delta's defensive protocols and examining after-action reports from the Ranger patrols that had encountered Petrov. In the afternoon, he scheduled a marksmanship evaluation for the base's qualified shooters. At the firing range, Brooks watched as Rangers demonstrated their skills with various weapon systems. Collins showed impressive accuracy with the M4 platform, and Martinez demonstrated solid capabilities with the M14 designated marksman rifle. But when Brooks asked about extreme distance shooting capabilities, the responses were hesitant. "Sir, our best distance shooter was Johnson, but he's recovering from wounds sustained in the last Petrov encounter," Collins explained. "The rest of us are qualified to 800 meters maximum." Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "I understand Lieutenant Hayes performed exceptional medical treatment on Morrison's arterial wound. Is she available?" Collins looked confused by the change in subject. "Yes, sir. She should be at the aid station. Have her brought to the range, please." 10 minutes later, Olivia arrived at the firing range, her expression professionally neutral despite her surprise at being summoned. Brooks studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in details that others might miss. The way she automatically noted firing positions, how her gaze measured distances, the balanced stance that came from thousands of hours on a firing line. "Lieutenant Hayes," Brooks said finally, "I'm evaluating all personnel who might contribute to our counter-sniper operations. I understand you're a medical advisor, but all camp personnel should have basic marksmanship qualification. Would you mind demonstrating your capabilities?" The request seemed reasonable on the surface, but Wilson, standing nearby, recognized the test for what it was. Brooks was deliberately creating a situation where Olivia would have to either reveal her true skills or deliberately underperform. "Sir," Wilson interjected, "Lieutenant Hayes is medical personnel, not a qualified marksman. Having her demonstrate firing positions with an unfamiliar weapon system could present safety concerns." Brooks's response was measured but firm. "I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant Wilson, but I'd like to see Hayes's capabilities firsthand." He gestured toward a table where various weapons were displayed, including a massive Barrett M82A1 50 caliber sniper rifle. "Hayes, would you mind examining this Barrett system? Just a basic inspection to verify functionality." Olivia hesitated only briefly before approaching the weapon. The moment her hands touched the rifle, muscle memory took over. Years of training with her father guided her movements with unconscious precision. She began a methodical examination that went far beyond basic weapons familiarity. Her fingers traced the barrel to receiver alignment with micrometer precision. She checked the bolt assembly with the practiced ease of someone who had field stripped this exact model hundreds of times. When she examined the scope mounting system, her adjustments were microscopic but decisive, the kind of fine-tuning that comes only from intimate understanding of how optics affect accuracy at extreme distances. Brooks watched her work with quiet assessment, noting the natural way her hands moved across the weapon's components. Wilson observed with growing concern, realizing Brooks was deliberately forcing Olivia to reveal knowledge far beyond what any medical officer should possess. "The scope mount has a slight torque issue on the left side," Olivia reported professionally. "I've corrected it, but it might need reinforcement for extended firing sessions. The barrel harmonics seem optimal, though I'd recommend checking headspace if you're planning shots beyond 1,500 meters." Her assessment was delivered in clinical terms, but the technical specificity betrayed expertise that couldn't be explained by basic weapons familiarity. Brooks nodded thoughtfully, his professional assessment clearly shifting as he processed her response. "That's remarkably detailed analysis, Lieutenant Hayes," he observed. "Most people would need specialized tools and considerable time to evaluate barrel harmonics and mounting torque issues." "I've always been detail-oriented, sir," Olivia replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the dangerous territory she was entering. Brooks made a decision that would change everything. "Hayes, I want you to take one shot at that 600-meter target. Consider it final equipment verification before we begin the actual evaluation." His request sent ripples of surprise through the gathered personnel. Having support personnel demonstrate shooting skills went against every protocol Wilson had been emphasizing about appropriate roles in military hierarchy. "Colonel," Wilson protested, his voice carrying a note of genuine alarm, "Lieutenant Hayes isn't qualified for precision shooting activities. She's medical personnel, not a trained marksman. This could be dangerous." Brooks's response was delivered with the quiet authority that came from years of special operations leadership. Lieutenant Wilson, I've observed Hayes's equipment, handling, her technical knowledge, and her firing position. Unless you have specific safety concerns about her competence with this weapon system, I'd like to see her demonstrate basic marksmanship capability. His tone made it clear that this wasn't a request subject to Wilson's approval. Olivia remained motionless behind the Barrett, waiting for resolution of the command conflict playing out above her. But those watching closely might have noticed subtle changes in her breathing pattern, her muscle tension, and her focus, suggesting someone transitioning from equipment demonstration to actual shooting preparation. The 600-meter target stood in the distance, a standard military silhouette that would challenge most shooters using standard rifle systems. For the Barrett M82A1, it should have been a relatively straightforward shot under current environmental conditions. But everyone watching understood that Olivia's performance would either confirm Wilson's assessment of her limitations or raise questions about who she really was and what she was actually capable of achieving. Brooks stepped back to provide clear observation. Hayes, when you're ready, fire one shot at the 600-meter target. Take your time, use proper technique, and show me what you can do. Olivia's breathing slowed to the rhythm her father had taught her 15 years earlier. The Barrett became an extension of her body, exactly as Thomas Hayes had promised it would when the moment was right. The target filled her scope with crystalline clarity, and for just an instant, she could hear her father's voice whispered across the years. When the moment comes, Liv, you'll know exactly what to do. The Barrett's report echoed across the firing range like thunder rolling through mountain valleys. Its massive, .50 caliber signature announcing to everyone within miles that serious precision shooting was taking place. The sound was followed by absolute silence, not just from the assembled Rangers and Special Operations personnel, but from the entire base, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the target confirmation. Through the spotting scope, Brooks watched the 600-meter target with professional focus. But what he saw made him pause and look again with the deliberate care of someone who couldn't quite believe the evidence before his eyes. The bullet had struck dead center mass, creating a hole so precisely placed that it appeared to have been measured and marked rather than achieved through marksmanship. Perfect center hit, Brooks announced, his voice carrying a note of controlled surprise that made every Ranger within hearing distance turn to stare at Olivia Hayes. That was outstanding marksmanship, textbook technique, flawless execution. His professional assessment was delivered with the kind of respect typically reserved for acknowledged experts, and the gathered personnel began to realize that something fundamental had just changed in their understanding of their quiet medic. Brooks wasn't finished with his evaluation. Reyes, I'd like to see you demonstrate shooting at a more challenging distance. Would you be comfortable attempting a shot at the 1,200-meter target? His request sent visible shock through the assembled Rangers. 1,200 meters was the maximum distance planned for the competition, reserved for the most skilled marksmen from each participating unit. It represented the boundary between competent marksmen and truly exceptional shooters. I can make the shot, Colonel, Olivia said simply. The environmental conditions are well within acceptable parameters. The 1,200-meter target was barely visible to the naked eye, a distance that required optical magnification to identify clearly. Environmental factors that were manageable at 600 meters became critical at twice the distance. Wind velocity changes, temperature variations, and even the Earth's rotation would affect bullet trajectory over the extended flight time required to reach the target. Olivia's preparation was methodical but efficient, drawing on techniques her father had taught her during countless training sessions in the Montana mountains. She made minute adjustments to the scope settings, accounting for the increased distance and current atmospheric conditions. Through the scope, the target appeared as a small, dark shape against the mountain backdrop, its edges wavering slightly in the heat mirage that rose from the valley floor. Despite the cool temperature, Olivia's crosshairs settled on the center mass, with the steady precision that comes from muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of practice. Her father's voice seemed to whisper across the years, "At extended range, Liv, You're not just shooting at a target. You're proving that human skill can overcome physics, distance, and doubt all at the same time. The second Barrett shot cracked across Camp Delta with the same authoritative report as the first, but this time the bullet had to travel twice as far through air that would test every aspect of Olivia's ballistic calculations and shooting technique. Through the spotting scope, Brooks's expression changed from professional interest to something approaching awe. At 1,200 meters, under environmental conditions that challenged even the most sophisticated equipment, Olivia had achieved another perfect center hit, a shot that would have impressed special operations, snipers, and established her capabilities at a level that transcended anything previously imagined at Camp Delta. Perfect center hit at 1,200 meters, Brooks announced, his voice carrying a note of professional reverence that immediately transformed the atmosphere. The gathered Rangers stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Their quiet medic, the woman they had dismissed as bookworm for months, had just demonstrated marksmanship capabilities that belonged among the military's most elite shooters. As Olivia began to secure the Barrett system, Brooks stepped closer, his expression carrying the focused attention of someone who had suddenly recognized something significant. "Hayes," he said quietly, his voice pitched so only she could hear, "that shooting technique, the pre-shot routine, the breathing pattern, the way you read environmental conditions. Where did you learn those methods?" His question carried implications that went far beyond casual curiosity, and Olivia realized that her performance had revealed more about her background than she had intended. She looked up from the rifle, meeting Brooks's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had always known this moment would eventually arrive. "My father taught me, Colonel," she replied simply. "He believed that marksmanship was about more than just shooting accurately. He said it was about understanding responsibility." Brooks nodded slowly, his expression indicating that pieces of a puzzle were falling into place in his mind. "Your father's name wouldn't happen to be Thomas Hayes, would it? Navy SEAL sniper, served multiple tours in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Legendary reputation for impossible shots under extreme conditions." He paused, his voice dropping further. "Went by the call sign Ghost." Olivia held Brooks's gaze, understanding that the moment for concealment had passed. "Thomas Hayes was my father," she confirmed, her voice carrying quiet pride mixed with the grief that still accompanied any discussion of her father's legacy. "He died 3 years ago in a training accident at Quantico." Her admission finally explained the mystery that had surrounded Camp Delta's enigmatic medic for months. She wasn't just another support personnel with unusual competence. She was the daughter of one of the most legendary snipers in modern military history. The base alarm system erupted with urgent warning tones before Brooks could respond further. Colonel Reynolds' voice cut through the confusion, broadcasting across the base-wide communication system. "All personnel, defensive positions. Patrol team under fire at dam perimeter. Multiple casualties reported." The shooting demonstration forgotten, Rangers rushed to their assigned positions while medical personnel prepared for incoming wounded. Brooks immediately took command of the tactical response, ordering a reaction team to prepare for immediate deployment. "The patrol is pinned down approximately 2 kilometers south of the base," he reported after receiving updated intelligence. "They're taking precision fire from an elevated position east of their location. 3 confirmed casualties already, including Specialist Johnson and Martinez." Brooks turned to Collins, his expression grim. "Collins, we need counter-sniper support for the extraction team. You'll accompany Alpha Team to establish overwatch while we recover the wounded." Collins nodded, but his expression betrayed concern. "Sir, I'm good to 800 meters in ideal conditions. Reports indicate this shooter is engaging from beyond 1,500. That's beyond my effective range." Brooks's face hardened as he calculated options. His eyes found Olivia, who stood ready with her medical kit already prepared for casualty treatment. "Hayes," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command decision. "We need your skills now. All of them. This isn't about roles or protocols anymore. It's about saving lives. Wilson started to object, but Brooks silenced him with a sharp gesture. This isn't a debate, Lieutenant. We have men dying out there because we're outmatched in precision shooting capability. Hayes is the only person on this base with the proven skill to counter this threat. Olivia felt time slow around her as the moment of decision crystallized. For months, she had hidden her true capabilities, choosing the healer's path over the shooter's. Now those choices collided in a situation where lives hung in the balance. "Sir," she said with calm resolve that surprised even her, "I'll need the Barrett and 10 minutes to calculate environmental factors for extended range engagement." Brooks nodded sharply. "You'll have it. Wilson, get Hayes whatever equipment she needs. Collins, brief her on the terrain features and known enemy positions." As the Rangers rushed to prepare the emergency response, Olivia caught Wilson's gaze. The staff sergeant's expression had transformed completely, the condescension replaced by a complex mixture of respect, regret, and urgent focus on the mission. "I'll get your equipment," he said simply. "What else do you need?" "The latest meteorological data, a topographical map of the engagement area, and my father's journal from my footlocker," Olivia replied, her mind already calculating ballistic factors for extreme distance shooting. Wilson's eyebrow raised at the last item, but he nodded without comment. "You'll have everything in 5 minutes." As he hurried away, Morrison approached, moving with the careful gait of someone still recovering from serious injury. "Doc," he said, using the nickname that had replaced Bookworm after she saved his leg. "Johnson and Martinez are my friends. You're the only one who can help them now." The simple statement carried all the trust and expectation that Olivia had once feared she could never earn at Camp Delta. Now, in a moment of crisis, she had been fully accepted, not just as a medical officer, but as someone with unique capabilities that could save lives in ways no one else could. "I'll bring them home," she promised, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had characterized her father's most solemn commitments. All of them. The sun hung mercilessly in the Montana sky as Olivia prepared for what might be the most challenging shot of her life. Camp Delta had transformed into a hive of coordinated activity. Rangers preparing extraction vehicles, medics readying trauma kits, communications specialists establishing direct links with the pinned-down patrol. Through it all, Olivia worked with methodical precision at a makeshift sniper position on the base's southern observation post. The Barrett M82A1 rested on a stabilized platform, its massive frame seeming almost alive in the shimmering heat. Beside it lay a collection of tools that marked Olivia as her father's daughter. A Kestrel weather meter measuring wind speed, temperature, and humidity. A laser rangefinder capable of calculating distances beyond 3 kilometers. And most personally, her father's worn leather journal open to pages containing advanced ballistic formulas developed during his years as a SEAL Team 6 operator. Wilson approached with steady purpose, his weathered face set with determination. "I've calculated preliminary wind values across the valley. 3 distinct wind zones between here and the target area. Primary variable is the updraft from the second ridge." Olivia nodded, making notes in her father's journal. "The Coriolis effect will be significant at this range. With bullet travel time approaching 6 seconds, we need to account for 3.7 inches of drift from Earth's rotation alone." Wilson looked impressed despite himself. "Your father taught you well. He always said the impossible shot isn't about extraordinary ability," Olivia replied, adjusting the Barrett's bipod with micrometric precision. "It's about accounting for ordinary physics with extraordinary precision." Brooks joined them, his expression grave. "Extraction team is moving to their position. Intelligence has confirmed Petrov's location, Eastern Ridge, elevation approximately 2,200 meters. He has clear lines of fire to both the dam facility and our extraction route." "Range to target?" Olivia asked, her focus absolute. Brooks checked the tactical overlay. 3,187 meters from your position." A momentary silence followed as the implications registered. 3,187 meters, nearly 2 miles. well beyond the established maximum effective range of even the most advanced sniper systems. The current confirmed kill record in combat stood at 2,815 meters, achieved by a British sniper in Iraq using specialized equipment in ideal conditions. What Olivia was attempting would exceed that by over 300 meters. That's beyond any documented effective range, Hayes, Brooks finally responded. Can you make that shot? Olivia was already calculating the complex physics equation that such a shot demanded. At this distance, she would need to account for variables that most snipers never considered: the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation, the significant bullet drop of nearly 30 meters over the flight path, variations in air density at different elevations, and wind conditions that might change multiple times before the round reached its target. She thought of her father, of the lessons he had drilled into her since childhood. The impossible shot isn't about extraordinary ability, he had told her. It's about accounting for ordinary physics with extraordinary precision. I can make the shot, sir, she responded with quiet confidence. But I'll need the extraction team to hold position. Any movement might alert the target. Understood. Extraction team, hold at checkpoint Alpha, Brooks ordered. Hayes has control of the operation. That simple statement, giving tactical control to a medical advisor who had been dismissively called bookworm just hours earlier, represented a transformation that even Olivia hadn't anticipated. In this moment of crisis, her true capabilities had not only been revealed, but embraced by the very unit that had marginalized her. Olivia settled behind the Barrett, her mind entering the focused state her father had taught her to achieve. The outside world fell away as she methodically adjusted for each variable that would affect the bullet's flight. The Kestrel meter showed an 8-knot crosswind at her position, but experience told her the wind would be different across the valley and at higher elevations. Through the scope, she studied subtle indicators, the movement of distant vegetation, dust patterns, heat mirage, building a comprehensive model of the atmospheric conditions across the entire shot path. Her fingers made minute adjustments to the scope settings, accounting for variables that would be meaningless to anyone without her specialized training. Eastern Ridge sector hot, Collins reported urgently through the radio. Patrols taking fire again. One additional casualty reported. Target is Sergeant Morrison. The news sent a jolt through Olivia's concentration. Morrison, the ranger whose life she had saved during the arterial crisis. The first person at Camp Delta to show her genuine respect. Now, he was wounded and dependent on her making what might be the most difficult shot in military history. Olivia took a controlled breath, refocusing with the disciplined calm her father had insisted she master. The Barrett felt alive in her hands, an extension of her will rather than a separate mechanical device. Through the scope, she could make out the faintest disruption in the natural pattern of the ridgeline. Not the shooter himself, but the subtle shadow cast by his position. I have partial target acquisition, she reported. Stand by for engagement. Her breathing slowed to the practiced rhythm of an elite marksman. 4 seconds in, 4-second hold, 4 seconds out. Her heartbeat steadied as she timed the shot to fall within the natural pause between beats. Every element of her physical being aligned with the single purpose of delivering a precisely calculated projectile across an almost inconceivable distance. In the final moment before firing, Olivia had a sudden, vivid recollection of her father's voice during their last training session together. Remember, Liv? The shooter doesn't make the shot. Physics makes the shot. The shooter simply arranges the conditions to let physics work perfectly. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by Olivia's perfectly positioned body. The .50 caliber round began its journey across 3 mountain ridges, traveling for nearly 6 full seconds, an eternity in ballistic terms. During that flight time, the bullet would rise over 30 meters above the line of sight, be pushed laterally by changing winds, and gradually lose velocity while maintaining enough kinetic energy to remain devastatingly effective. Through her scope, Olivia watched for impact indicators, but at this extreme distance, immediate confirmation would be impossible. The tense silence of anticipation filled the tactical radio as everyone waited to learn if the impossible shot had found its mark. 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. Target hit, came the shocked report from the observation team monitoring the eastern ridge. Direct impact observed on shooter position. Brooks's voice followed immediately. Extraction team, move now. Secure the patrol and prepare for immediate casualty evacuation. As the Humvees roared toward the pinned-down patrol, Olivia remained focused on the distant ridge, watching for any sign of additional threats. Through her scope, she could see the extraction team reaching the patrol position, Rangers moving with tactical precision to secure wounded personnel and establish a defensive perimeter. Hayes. Brooks's voice came through the radio with unmistakable respect. Hold your overwatch position until the extraction is complete. You're our insurance policy if any additional hostiles appear. Understood, sir, she acknowledged, maintaining her vigilant observation of the surrounding terrain. 20 minutes later, the extraction vehicles returned to Camp Delta, carrying the wounded patrol members. As soon as they passed her position, Olivia secured the Barrett and hurried back to the base, transitioning seamlessly from sniper to medical officer. Her mind had already shifted to trauma assessment and treatment priorities as she reached the aid station. The wounded were being transferred from the vehicles when she arrived. 4 Rangers with varying injuries, including Morrison with a bullet wound to his shoulder. Despite the tension of the moment, a ripple of recognition passed through the group as Olivia approached. These men had departed, believing her to be simply their medical advisor. They returned knowing she had made a shot that would be discussed in military circles for decades. Doc, Morrison greeted her through gritted teeth as she began examining his wound. They said you took out that sniper from over 3 kilometers away. That true? Let's focus on your shoulder, Morrison, she deflected, her medical training taking precedence over any discussion of her marksmanship. The shoulder can wait, Morrison insisted, his eyes locked on hers with newfound respect. You saved our lives out there, all of us. Olivia met his gaze briefly, then returned to her medical assessment. That's my job, Sergeant, one way or another. Hours later, after the wounded had been stabilized and the base had returned to heightened alert status, Colonel Brooks called a special briefing in the command center. The room was filled with Rangers and SOCOM personnel, an atmosphere of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Brooks stood at the front, his commanding presence drawing immediate attention as he began speaking. Today, personnel from Camp Delta participated in one of the most extraordinary operations I've witnessed in 40 years of military service. The successful extraction of our patrol would not have been possible without the exceptional contribution of one individual. His eyes found Olivia, who stood quietly near the back of the room in her medical advisor's uniform, the blood of treated casualties still staining her sleeves. Lieutenant Olivia Hayes demonstrated shooting skills today that redefine what we consider humanly possible. Her engagement of a hostile sniper at 3,187 meters represents the longest confirmed kill in military history by a significant margin. A murmur ran through the assembled personnel, a mixture of amazement and dawning respect. These were combat veterans who understood precisely what such a shot represented. The almost supernatural combination of skill, calculation, and execution required to deliver a lethal round at nearly 2 miles. But equally important, Brooks continued, was Lieutenant Hayes' immediate transition from combat shooter to medical advisor, providing life-saving treatment to the very personnel she had just protected through her marksmanship. This dual capability represents the highest ideals of military service, the ability both to eliminate threats and to heal those in need. The room had fallen completely silent, all eyes now on the woman they had dismissively called bookworm for months. What many of you may not know, Brooks said, his tone shifting to one of personal respect, is that Lieutenant Hayes is the daughter of Master Chief Thomas Ghost Hayes, one of the most distinguished snipers in Navy SEAL history. I had the privilege of serving with Ghost during several classified operations, where his extraordinary skills saved countless American lives. The revelation sent another ripple of reaction through the room. Many had heard of Ghost Hayes, As his exploits were legendary in special operations circles, his techniques taught in advanced sniper schools across all military branches. 3 years ago, Master Chief Hayes died in what was officially recorded as a training accident at Quantico. Brooks continued, his expression growing more serious. However, based on information we've gathered during this deployment, I now believe that incident requires re-examination. Olivia felt her breath catch. Brooks was publicly acknowledging suspicions she had harbored since her father's death, suspicions she had never been able to prove or even properly investigate. The sniper neutralized today has been identified as Viktor Petrov, a former Soviet Spetsnaz operator working as a mercenary. Brooks activated a wall display showing surveillance photographs of a grim-faced man with pale eyes and a distinctive scar across his left cheekbone. Intelligence indicates Petrov has been responsible for precision killings of American personnel across multiple theaters, including operations that were never publicly disclosed. The implication hung in the air, operations like the one that might have led to Thomas Hayes' death. Captain Reynolds and I have requested a formal investigation into possible connections between Petrov and previously unexplained incidents involving American Special Operations personnel, including the Quantico training accident. Olivia stood perfectly still, her mind processing the extraordinary implications of Brooks's statement. After years of private suspicion and frustrated inquiry, the truth about her father's death might finally emerge. Brooks's gaze moved across the assembled personnel, his expression reflecting the gravity of the moment. Until that investigation is complete, the details of today's operation remain classified. However, I want everyone in this room to understand something clearly. His eyes settled on Olivia once more. Lieutenant Hayes exemplifies the finest traditions of American military service. Her actions today saved lives that would otherwise have been lost, and her capabilities represent a standard to which we should all aspire. 6 months later, Camp Delta had transformed in ways few could have predicted. Under Colonel Reynolds' progressive leadership and with SOCOM's support, the base had implemented a pioneering program that integrated medical training with defensive operations. At the center of this innovation stood Lieutenant Olivia Hayes, now officially designated as both medical advisor and precision systems specialist. The Rangers, who had once mockingly called her bookworm, now sought her expertise in both trauma care and marksmanship. The dual training program she developed, teaching combat medics basic sniper observation techniques and instructing marksmen in emergency medical procedures, had reduced casualties by 40% during patrol operations. Lieutenant Wilson, initially the most skeptical of her capabilities, had become her strongest advocate, frequently telling new arrivals, "Lieutenant Hayes represents the future of integrated combat operations. She can save your life in more ways than anyone else on this base." The Defense Intelligence Agency investigation into Thomas Hayes' death continued, with periodic updates suggesting progress toward identifying the high-level official who had authorized his elimination. The knowledge that justice might finally come for her father provided Olivia with a sense of closure that had eluded her for years. On a clear autumn morning, Olivia stood at the Eastern Observation Post, the same position from which she had made her historic shot 6 months earlier. The Barrett M82A1 rested beside her, no longer a weapon she needed to conceal knowledge of, but an official tool in her expanded role. Colonel Brooks approached, having returned to Camp Delta for an operational assessment. His expression was thoughtful as he joined her at the railing, looking out over the same mountain ranges that had once concealed a deadly threat. "The programs you've implemented here are being studied at the highest levels," he informed her. "Special Operations Command is considering similar integration of medical and defensive capabilities across multiple theaters." Olivia nodded, accepting the information with characteristic modesty. "It's a logical evolution. Every shooter should understand how to save lives, not just take them. Every medic should recognize threats before they materialize." "Your father used to say something similar," Brooks recalled. He believed the perfect operator was one who understood both the mechanics of precision engagement and the responsibility of preservation. It seems he trained you to embody that ideal. Olivia's gaze remained on the distant mountains as she considered this assessment. He trained me to protect others by whatever means necessary. Sometimes that requires a scalpel. Sometimes it requires a barret. The tool matters less than the purpose behind it. Brooks nodded in agreement. The Pentagon has officially recognized your 3,187-meter shot as the longest confirmed engagement in military history. They're calling it the Ghost Legacy in the records. A small smile crossed Olivia's face. I prefer to think of it as my father's shot. I just executed what he taught me. He would disagree. Brooks countered gently. Thomas always gave credit where it was due. He'd be the first to acknowledge that what you accomplished that day was uniquely your own achievement. He paused, his expression growing more serious. There's something else you should know. The investigation has identified Deputy Secretary of Defense Harold Mitchell as the American architect of Operation Sidewinder. He's gone missing, presumably fled to Eastern Europe, where he's attempting to rebuild the network. Olivia absorbed this information with the measured consideration her father had taught her to apply to all intelligence. He won't stop just because he's been identified. No, he won't, Brooks agreed. That's why I've been authorized to form a specialized unit to track him down and dismantle what remains of Sidewinder. A unit that needs someone with your unique combination of skills. Wilson approached, his weathered face bearing the resolute expression of a man who had found renewed purpose. I told the colonel I'm coming out of retirement for this one. Your father saved my life once. It's time I return the favor to his legacy. Olivia looked between the two men, sensing the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about avenging her father's death or even bringing a dangerous operation to justice. It was about continuing the work Thomas Hayes had begun, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves by whatever means necessary. When do we leave? She asked simply. As the Montana sun cast long shadows across Camp Delta, three figures walked toward the waiting helicopter. A legendary Special Operations commander, an aging SEAL who had found redemption, and a young woman who had proven that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one nobody sees coming. The Ghost's legacy lived on, not just in the record books, but in the continuation of his most sacred mission, using extraordinary skills to save ordinary lives. Behind them, the mountains stood silent witness to what had been accomplished and what was yet to come, a reminder that some legacies, like the perfect shot, transcend time, distance, and even death itself.